welcome back to the New Era podcasts in cooperation with the Jerusalem Post. I'm so glad to be back as your host, Tamar Uriel Berry, and I'm joined, as always, by Gideon Argov. Giddy, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Tamar. It's great to be co-hosting with you another podcast, the second in our series, New Era, No Limits. It's nice to see you, and congratulations, or almost. You're about to be a mom.
Yeah, I am about to be a mom, and I have to say that it's landing on me a little hard because I'm realizing that I'm an adult, which I refuse to acknowledge until this point. And also thinking about the future is kind of freaky. You can deny it until a certain age, you know?
It only gets better. I have the kids to prove it. So
what do you think is like the key to aging gracefully?
Well, first of all, you just said I'm old, so that's
I
problematic.
didn't say that.
But I would say
directly.
The key is to not age, and that's a problem because we all do. So don't
but
think about it.
I mean, however we can age, it's important to do it the best way possible. And I think there's no better way to introduce our guests for today. And these are the founders of Assured Allies. Guys, I'd love for you to introduce yourselves, please. That was the most Israeli response I could have gotten.
Yes, more or less. So I'll start.
Yeah, sure.
Nice to meet you all. I'm Afik Gal, one of the co-founders of Assured, as you said. I'm Israeli. I do live in the US these days. A physician by training. Spent most of my career in healthcare technology world, or various startups in Israel and the US. And essentially came to this realization that we are all aging, and my parents were aging, and so on and so forth, and a lot of others around us, and that there is a gap there, that even I as a physician did not know what to do or what are the right things to recommend and say, and nobody's really trying to fill that gap. So we started the company with the goal of doing that, just that, so helping as many people as possible successfully age.
Cool. So I'm Roee. I'm Afik's co-founder and the CEO of Assured. I originally come from technology background. I served in the Israel Intelligence Corps for 6 years. And after that, I shifted to the business side. I did my MBA back here in Israel and started my previous company, which was called Adience. We sold Adience, I think, 7 years ago. It was a successful exit. And then I had the privilege to think what's next for me. I was contemplating between a few options, and I've decided that I had it in me to start yet another company, but I wanted that company to be a meaningful one, one that actually makes an impact on the way people live their life. I made some research and looked at a few different verticals. And then I thought of like, what are the difficult problems that I've experienced this way or the other? And I've realized that I've seen both my parents and my in-laws supporting an older adult as they age. And I realized that even for them, with all the resources that they had, and some of them have medical background, etc., it was such a challenging thing. And I was saying to myself that if it was challenging for them, like probably is challenging for most people. And I was thinking, is there a way to make it easier? And then I got introduced to Afik, which is a completely different story. And we started exploring this area together, and we zoomed in on a problem that ended up being what Assured Allies is doing.
And let's start with a question about the name Assured Allies, because it strikes me anyway that most tech companies today have names that are modeled on a Greek or Roman deity, some kind of a short, catchy name that's tech sounding. And when I think about Assured Allies, I mean, it sounds like a board game. It sounds like Dungeons and Dragons, or
it's a mouthful.
The Game of Life, or something like that. Where did this traditional name come from? How did you think about that?
That's a good question, yeah.
So it is a mouthful. And a lot of people told us that from very early on. And we tried at the beginning, we didn't try to make it like a Greek or Latin alphabet or vegetable. But it was very clear for us that we are doing something where the name needs to be very, very close with the meaning and the service and the experience. And it was very clear to us from the beginning that we want to go after the older population. So we wanted plain English. We wanted words that people know and associate positively. So, for
And
example,
alliteration, by the way, as an English literature major from a bachelor's degree, is truly appreciated as well.
yes. So we looked at brands that we liked. There was an Ally Bank, and there is an Ally Bank in the U.S., and there are others. And we tried to say, okay, this has to have some component of insurance, and assurance was the right way of going about it. And from there, it was really kind of like a journey. I think how I got to the Allies. We started doing all of the.
So we started with the assured piece, and then we wanted something that is not just insurance, and we wanted to convey the idea that we are going to be with you, with the older adult, in your journey, on their journey. And so we were looking for some words that were conveying that, and we did some market research, because at the end of the day, I think in this case more than others, it is important to, our target population is unique in many ways. For many startup companies in other verticals such as cyber or SaaS, it matters less, I think. And for us, to have a word or a name that is solid and conveys the essence of the business was more important than usual.
I also love your tagline. You have this tagline, which I think is brilliant, which is later is greater.
Yeah, making later.
And making later.
Making later is greater. So I'd love to get you to talk about what does the company do? So what is the mission of Assured Allies? And can you tell the listeners really what this company is trying to do?
Okay, so we want to make later greater. But what does it mean, right? So the context is that today, because of science and medicine, technology, the life expectancy, people live longer, right? So the life expectancy is kind of being pushed further and further down the road. Unfortunately, life quality doesn't necessarily catch up, right? So there's a big gap between what is called health span and lifespan, right? So people live longer, but they live longer with the same chronic condition. They just live longer with that. And our mission is to help people to kind of maximize their aging potential, to successfully age, to age as best as they can. And the idea is that there is actually a playbook to do that. Right? And that playbook is very similar to what happens in medicine with preventative care and population health management. Right? So the idea is that if you could predict the individual aging trajectory, meaning what are the risks of an individuals and what are the risk factors and the problems that she or he might encounter in the future, and you could help them prevent some of them or better cope with others, then you can actually help them to maximize their aging potential. Okay, so the idea is to leverage technology and data to be able to build that aging trajectory, and then to use data to predict what are the best interventions or services that individual can benefit from, and then make it so that they can actually benefit from that. And it's not a trivial thing, because there's a lot of friction and reasons for people not to consume such services. And we will get to that in a second when we describe how we productize this idea. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's a game of big numbers. So a lot of people, so you see in the US, it's about 65 million that will over 65 by 2030 or something like that, and it's expected to grow. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, this is a very scientific business. So much like there is a lot of science behind what you should do in order to be less disabled, more active, more sharp as you age.
Are you going to tell me to stop eating chocolate because you can't tell?
No, that's the
opposite.
opposite. We highly recommend that. That's
I actually appreciate that. I kind of segued very smoothly into that, but I got very excited when you guys walked in with a box of chocolates.
That's why I married a chocolatier, a professional chocolatier. So it's the secret.
So not that kind of thing is not the kind of instructions we're getting. Got it.
Smoking cessation is
there we go. Got it.
No, but I think it's a really interesting problem, because on one hand it's a huge problem, and it's on the other hand there is a very scientific problem. But actually, when it boils down to the individual, it's a very personal problem. So later, greater is great, but it means so many different things to so many different individuals. For some of them, it's going to be running a marathon at the age of 60, 70. But for some of them, it's just being able to walk in their garden despite all of their physical limitations. And really the goal was to try to get in a financially sustainable way. We are not a non-for-profit. We are not a government program. We are trying to make this a viable business for companies to join us and get this to as many people as possible. And this is really what we are focusing on. As many people in a way that is financially sustainable.
So, I mean, you guys come from, you discussed it earlier, vastly different backgrounds, but that kind of prepared you both in very unique ways for leading a company with such, special goals. What do you think, what aspects of your lives, of your experiences, especially professional experiences, kind of prepared you for taking on this expedition, if you will?
So actually, it is interesting that we come from very different backgrounds, but we also have some similarity in background. So the technology background is pretty similar between us. And funny enough, in the company, both of us don't focus too much on the technology. We try to help and push, but it is something in common. But I do agree that there is a split in skills and split in background. Now, for me, it's pretty easy to say, being a physician, and it's funny enough, I sat with another physician that became an entrepreneur last week, and both of us said, it was very clear very quickly that the healthcare system is disappointing the older population every minute of every day. He was an ER doc. He said, I was doing things in the ER that I knew were wrong. That's not the right way. These people are suffering. I'm not helping here. And he left and started focusing on us. And for me,
that's a scary concept, though.
It is, but which is why I would always go, or my sisters would always go with my mom to the hospital should they need that type of a service. But for me, there was a lot of background, but there is also this realization that the healthcare system is not thinking about that, is not interested in that so much. And so that was one key element that I brought into this equation. Maybe there is some stuff to be learned from the healthcare system. For sure there is. But the mindset, no, this needs to be a different mindset. And then other things about execution in healthcare technology startups, which I've been doing 20 years, is this multidisciplinary view of the world that complex problems are never simple. They are complex by definition, and they always require many stakeholders and many disciplines to come together to try to find a solution. So this is also something that I think was very apparent to both Roee and I, but I had a lot of experience in similar situations of pitfalls to avoid when you try to do something like that.
Right. And Roee, what about you? I'm curious from your perspective.
So I think what really helped me in my journey, as I think about my background, was mostly the army service, in the sense that it really instilled a can-do mentality in many ways. I think I had the benefit of actually being an outsider for this industry, which helped me to ask silly questions that might actually, but kind of give a different point of view. I think that in this specific case, what really helped us is the fact that both of us felt that we are capable from the technology standpoint to estimate what's possible and what's not. So that gave us the leeway not to actually bound ourselves to actually doing stuff very early on that is actually building stuff, but actually going outside of the building and making research. So instead of being bounded to the question like, let's build something and see if it works, we leapfrogged over that and said, okay, we believe we can build this. Let's first check if that's something that is viable from the product standpoint and from the business standpoint. And that actually really accelerated our customer exploration phase. And it made us run very quickly through a series of small pivots until we found the problem that we actually wanted to build. And I think that also our company is somewhat unique in the sense that we are full stack on many different levels. I think because we're mission driven and we really care about actually helping the aging adults, we didn't want to stop at a dashboard or just software, in the sense that we didn't want to assume that other companies would just take our solution and do something with it, because it's complicated. And we wanted to make sure that the value that we create through technology is not being diluted by partners that partner with us. And that meant that we almost vertically integrated through the entire value chain here. And it's something that I think, and Gidi, you have much a broader perspective, I think it's pretty atypical, not typical for a startup company. And I think that what helped us in that journey was our ability to not be limited just focusing on technology, but actually think on a much broader picture. So I think that's what's unique here in my standpoint.
Yeah, I've really been struck ever since my association with the company started by the complexity of what you're trying to do. I mean, in a way, you're bringing complicated technology to bear, but the population that's going to end up benefiting from it is an older population, which is not normally a technology-savvy population. So that in itself is a complexity. On top of that, you're bringing outside services provided by a variety of entities, which you don't control directly, and yet need to be delivered with, with consistency, high quality, precision, and with proper follow-up. And to put the incentives in place to make that happen is very complex as well. Thirdly, you're dealing with insurance companies, which are not always the most technologically advanced or fastest thinking organizations, but yet they're the partners that are really very crucial. And I'd love it maybe if you could tell the listeners about how this all comes together. So what is the business model that you've created here that allows you to sort of pierce through this complexity and actually provide something that has such tremendous value?
So I'll start, and I think this was the biggest challenge, I would say, at the beginning. So we kind of said it before, a lot of companies start with technology, look for a solution. We started with a problem, fell in love with, and then figure out a business model for, and then we say, yeah, we can build the technology to drive that. And this is exactly that. Now, for us, I think it was very straightforward realization that nobody wants to spend money without good ROI on helping aging adults age. That was pretty, I'm sure you wouldn't be shocked by learning it, and we weren't shocked either. So with that realization, we said, okay, interesting, we want to help aging adults, but nobody wants to help to do that. So we need to figure out a way for them. We need to figure out a way to align incentives here. Okay, and the incentives here are financial because these are insurance companies and that's what they understand. So we really thought about, okay, let's pause here. Let's look at other problems that have similar alignment of incentives challenges in healthcare, for example. And let's see if we can build a model here that we are on one hand going to help the aging population, but the other hand, we are going to save money to somebody, and that somebody would be willing to pay us to do what we do. And this is really how we started, and we expanded that to multiple products, but the idea remained the same. This has to be a win-win-win value proposition, which means essentially alignment of incentives. We need to invest in aging adults. We need that investment to work and reduce the cost of disability, reduce the costs that somebody will incur, that somebody will reap the benefits and will pay us to help those aging adults. And only by creating this win-win or win-win-win, depends on the product, we believe this is possible.
I'll add another perspective into this. I'll add both like a macro and a micro perspective, I think. The macro perspective is that we believe there's a big market inefficiency in the aging economy, if you will. And the inefficiency is that there's a lot of problems with a lot of money behind them, and there's a lot of solutions that actually work, but there's a big disconnect between the two, right? So you could look at anything from depression, loneliness, falling in the shower. There's like endless list of problems. And each one of them is tied to like a potential audience of like dozens of millions and billions of dollars in direct loss. And at the same time, there's a lot of good solutions out there. And so you'd imagine there will be this, an effective or an efficient market where people actually consume those services. And that's not really the case. And the main reason for that in my mind is that target population is pretty much the last adopters, right? So there's a very high kind of threshold of credibility and trust for them to try new things, and they're not necessarily tech savvy, and there's a lot of reasons for them not to consume those services. And we realized that we shouldn't necessarily be in the business of inventing those interventions. We should be in the business of making that possible and making that possible commercially for them to consume. Now, we realized from the very early on that it's not likely for us to build, or maybe the path of least resistance is not to build something that directly charge the aging adults, because that's something very, very difficult. And we were looking for ways to kind of go around that. And we realized that there are other entities in the ecosystem, namely the insurance companies, that we can create a win-win and help and convince them to pay for those services and reduce some of the friction for the aging adults to consume services. There's still a lot of other frictions drivers out there, like being able to find the right thing, etc. But that took a big thing off the equation. So that's one thing. And the other thing goes back to the question of what is it that we do is we have this core competency, which is to be able to understand what somebody needs to make them successfully aged. And we package that in two different ways. One of them is to help insurance companies that have an outstanding existing commitment to their policyholders, namely through long-term care insurance, which we'll explain in a second, to save money through this win-win that Afik has explained, which is like if we can help people successfully age in place and stay in place longer, then we're actually preventing and delaying some of those insurance claims, and we're saving a lot of money to the insurance company. So that's one product that we have is called Age Assured. The other way to commercialize or to productize this is to take this competency of being the best company in managing long-term care risks and then help insurance companies create new products with some long-term care protection component, which is something that most aging adults are after. Because most people who are 60 plus years today have an 80 years old parents, and they've seen how difficult it is to age in the US from many aspects, right? Even just from the cost perspective, which is amazing, right? So a year in a nursing home in the US costs around $100,000 per year. So that's a very big number if you don't have substantial savings. And so this is a top of mind for most aging adults. And so helping insurance companies create a new generation of retirement solutions and products that embed into them long-term care protection is another thing that we do with a product called Never Stop. So these are the two things that we do that stem from our core competency of being able to understand how to help people successfully age.
I think that you described it really well in terms of the path of least resistance. I think that's like a really good term to use in this regard because you're really making it as easy as possible for these aging consumers. But from your perspective, this sounds like juggling a million things at once. And I'm curious, just as the leaders of such a company, how do you usually delegate between you two? Who's kind of in charge of what?
Actually, before I start, I just want to actually thank Gidi because I think what she said implies another point, which is what we do is not a typical startup playbook. We have two products, and they are actually, each one of them is like super complicated, and they have like a ton of IP around them, whether it's an actual IP, clinical research, development, like a lot of work is being invested there. And it's a big risk for a startup company to do two things that are different. Two products in a different point in their life cycle and different requirements, etc. And I think it's not trivial to have a board and investors that actually support. Like I think we had a good reason to do that, and I think it's the right thing for us as a company. But having a board that supports that thing, which is like a completely non-trivial playbook, I think it's like we're lucky to have those investors. So that's just as a background for why this is not a trivial thing. As for how we split it in terms of responsibility, we always wear two hats, right? So each one of us has the co-founder hat. So we are equal partners. We've been on the road for many years now together. And we are equal shareholders. So that's one hat. The other hat is our day-to-day responsibilities, me as a CEO and he as a president. And I'll actually let you answer.
Yeah, so I think one key thing that drives this, that makes it a lot easier, is the geographical differences. I'm based in the US, always based here and spends a lot of time in the US as well, but there is some flexibility in the fact that you are in the US and constantly you can jump to clients, you know the market well, you know the companies well and connect. So everything that's around the product and the business's interaction, usually I do, but getting the company to walk and deliver all of that and support the machine, I try to do some of that in the US, but Roee is kind of in charge of the entire thing, and not to mention the investor to support us and all of the other energy that pummeled to our efforts.
Yeah, and I would just add as an anecdote that this is not my first startup, but as a young entrepreneur, I was being told that you need to be out there in the US because that's where your market is. And I thought, yeah, I mean, that's something you could do while flying there from time to time. But in this startup, I think seeing Afik there and like how impactful his ongoing presence there and the fact that we have half of the company there, I think that really opened my eyes about this. And even though I spend, in the last 5 years, while 2 of them were like COVID years, I've been traveling to the US constantly. I think I've been there 35 times in the last 5 years, -2. So like,
oh my God.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot of
But
airplanes.
what makes it, like a ton, and I could not have done it without my wife's support, but also without Afik, because whenever I'm there, like in those 35 times, I never took an hotel. I always stayed at Afik's place with Afik's
Because of
family.
the chocolates.
Because of
just
the chocolates.
To clarify.
And I
so-
assume like a very comfortable couch or something.
No,
I actually had my own
he has
room.
his own room. It's
Oh,
Roee's room,
wow.
and it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
The kids
so-
know that in the morning they wake him up.
But I think it goes back to a question about splitting responsibilities, because I think that this is like an amazing lift. Like the fact that Afik's wife, Afik's kid, Afik can actually like support, like handle me being there so frequently and for so long, I think tells a lot about our relationship and our ability to kind of be there for each other and to kind of enjoy working together. And I think that it goes back to the way we split work, actually.
That's a great story. But there are two of you, and there's a lot more people in the company. And so one follow-up question is: you really have this company that half of the people are in the U.S., roughly, half of them are in Israel. We all know that the business culture, in some ways it's similar, but in some ways it's quite different in Israel and the U.S. What are the challenges, and how do you make it work so that these teams actually are not two teams, but actually are one team?
I would say that we are very much a diverse company. So I think that both in the US and Israel, there's a lot of diversity in the company on many aspects. And I think that anywhere from the professional side, if you think about it, we employ actuaries, clinical research, people with background in epidemiology, clinicians, data scientists, developers. So it's quite a diverse, both from the profession standpoint, but also even here in Israel from geography standpoint. I think we, from day one, we started the office close to a train station. We have people coming from all around Israel. And I think it's great. And I think that especially today where, or in the recent years where people had a lot of optionality in terms of a workplace, people chose working for us because of the mission. And so we have, I think, a very unique culture on people who actually care about what we do and are very dedicated to the company. And I think it makes it, and this is the reason I'm saying this, is it makes it a little bit easier for people to work together and bridge those gaps because they know that their peers care about the same things. So even with the cultural differences, there's less, I think, like internal politics and things like that, because people are really driven by a mission. It makes it easier, but still there are a lot of gaps, and I'll hand off to Afik to maybe say something about that.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that this is very hard, and I don't think we're doing a perfect job in that. I don't know anybody that does. I actually think that there is one thing that beyond the U.S. Israel that creates a bigger challenge, I would say, in terms of collaboration, and that is really the different, and I've seen that with other companies as well, and that is really the different mindset and approach that clinicians have, and we obviously have a lot of them, social workers and others, because they are in the front line taking care of the aging adults, and as we scale to hundreds of thousands of lives, then those will scale as well. And at some point, we can get to really this equation that the majority of the company could be not R&D, could be, and there are ways to go about it, but there will be a lot of clinicians. And the way being a clinician myself, again, think about business, think about balancing multiple constraints, think about customer service versus other things, is very, very different from researchers and data scientists and so on and so forth. And that is something that could create a lot of frustration and oftentimes does, regardless of the US/Israel. Now, add on top of that most of the clinicians are in the US and most of the researchers and everything is in Israel, those two mix together. And that is really one of the key things on a day-to-day basis we're really focused on and trying to. So we fly all of the research people to the US, we fly clinical people here, we let them show how each other works, try to bridge those gaps. And in between also cover the US-Israel mentality difference / style differences. But that's not an easy. And that's the only thing I would say is that this requires day-to-day focus, and our VP of HR, which was super experienced in these type of scenarios, is like on a day-to-day basis, that's one of our biggest areas of focus. But I think it works partially because of the mission and partially because that we explain it to everybody that we know there's difference. We don't expect everybody to agree. We know you're not going to agree. You're going to see things differently. And at the end, the solution is going to be, nobody's necessarily going to be happy from the solution except the members, the aging adults, the policyholders, because we are going to balance the hell out of what everybody says.
Right. You're kind of taking two different also communities that are being focused on by these different clinicians. I'm curious though, that's in terms of clinicians, you have some in Israel, some in the US learning from one another, and that's great. But is there like some kind of hard line split up between distribution of powers and responsibilities between Israel and the US, or is it kind of half for all of the above?
The guiding principle, you probably have a broader intro, but the one guiding principle that I have is proximity to market. Some stuff requires proximity to market, which is clearly going to be in the US, but and what doesn't is open to discussion. But you probably have a bigger...
I mean, I think that historically we had more R&D here in Israel. So I think more than half of the company at the moment is R&D. Some of it is in the US, but most of it is here in Israel. And I agree with Afik that there are things that have to be as close as possible to the market, because you need to understand your audience at the end of the day. I would add one thing which makes things actually a little bit more complicated for us, which is that there's a lot of 0 to 1 problems versus 1 to many. Right? Because what we do is pretty novel and there's not a lot of examples, then there's a lot of things that you need to invent and do for the first time. And I think that is, it sounds exciting and it's actually a ton of fun, but it's also very, very complicated. And not many people are actually capable, like it's so much easier in many cases to look at something that is already exists and there's a structure and then improve it than to invent something for the first time. And so I think that makes it even harder because of that requirement.
Yeah, I would second that, having watched you guys go through a recent fundraising round and seeing how complex it has been to explain to very sophisticated financial investors what you do. And thankfully, enough of them figured out that there's value there, that you were very successful in the last round. But I want to talk about this for a minute, because Assured Allies sits on an intersection of 3 different sectors of the economy. One is obviously medical services, which are sort of at the tip of the spear in terms of what gets provided to the aging population. A second is InsurTech. You're basically interfacing with very large insurance companies, and that's a whole other realm. And then you're also an analytics company, and so those are typically, you're not a pure play, as they say. It's an integrated model, and I want to ask you in particular about the analytics portion of that, because there are many ways of providing services to aging populations, but you've layered in here a set of analytics that is able to basically parse through an enormous amount of data and figure out what works and what doesn't work, and to the point that you made when we started, Roee, the ROI, or I think maybe it was Afik, the ROI actually exists here. How does analytics work in this business?
So it's a great point. As you segued from the investors, and as you really said, some investors looked at this as, wait, this is too complex. This can go wrong in so many ways, like the glass half empty. And some investors said, oh, okay, it's the opposite. So it is complex, but they seem to have conquered a lot of it. And the glass half full here is that this actually has the advantages of several models and not the disadvantages of some others. Now, and I think this is something investors were pretty much divided into those camps pretty easy. You can easily spot which investor fell in which camp.
We're actually lucky that this is not simple, in the sense that it creates a positive selection bias. I think that investors that only look for a cookie cutter, yet another dashboard company, will not be a good fit for us, and we will not be a good fit for them. And so even though it was a little bit like it took me more energy to find those investors that are a good fit, because it's a subset, I think it was like we're lucky to have those investors.
It's like dating. Now, going back to analytics, which kind of connects pretty well to that, because analytics is something that everybody's looking for, and everybody wants AI, machine learning, and deep whatever, but and the multiples are accordingly, and so on and so forth. But I think for us, as not a SaaS company, not as a company that sells dashboards to clients, the analytics is really at the crux of what we do. So this is really the glue that brings it all together, with optimization for two endpoints. One endpoint is efficacy of what we do, whether it's efficacy in reducing disability or in selling policies or whatever the metric is. And the other one is really the financial aspect. So it could take many shapes or forms, but bottom line, it's ROI. Okay, carriers care about, for every dollar that goes in, more than a dollar comes to them. So in each of the products, the analytics is weaved really into the fabric of the product pretty strongly, and it really is what drives the performance that we're seeing across those two dimensions. So if we explained before, a product called Age Assured, which is a product to help carriers that already have aging adults already have policies in aging adults, with a lot of aging adults. And the goal here is to help them manage that risk and help those aging adults live longer, better. Then what we've done with the analytics there is we found the ways to better identify who needs help, who will need help, what type of help, when will they need it, what can we actually do to them that would be ROI positive, that the overall cost of what we are going to invest in, let's say 10,000 lives, will be lower the amount of money that we will save. And we're the first company in this industry, probably, I would say this is across several industries, that actually showed in clinical trial, randomized trial, like the most rigorous way of looking at performance, kind of like drugs, medications. We've actually shown significant savings in multi-million dollar savings in 1 or 2 years of deployment of that. So you really spend, you help people, but you save more than what you spend.
I have one more question, but I also want to point out that I learned something this morning that I found really interesting. And that is that you are about to hold your first Parents' Day.
Bring your parents to work day, yeah.
For your entire company in Israel. All, as I understand it, everybody who works in the company who has parents, which hopefully is
all grandparents.
All grandparents. It's like my kids in primary school had Grandparents' Day or Parents' Day, and so this is amazing. Tell us about that.
That's brilliant. I love that. Just a side note, I like, as an Israeli woman, my parents would be delighted for that kind of day.
Thank you. So it started with the idea that I wanted to send a personalized letter to all the employees' parents, because I thought we are really a mission-driven company. We don't do a lot of the, parties or anything. We really focus about making the impact. And I think that the kind of people who come work for us are really driven by this. And I think that that's something that their parents should be proud about, And I thought it could be a nice idea to send this letter talking about what the company does and what their daughter or son are doing. And then our VP of HR, Michal, upped me up on this and said, you know what, if we're going to do this, why shouldn't we just do this, bring your parents to work day? And so we are bringing everybody in today, and we're going to explain to the parents what the company does and what their what their children actually do in the company, how do they fit in, and what the products do.
That's delightful.
Yeah.
I love that. I think also that reflects like a really healthy employee culture in your company, which just sounds fantastic. I do have one more question for you, and just please answer this shortly, because I think that'll narrow it down to its very core. How, in Assured Allies terms, do you two define success?
So I think it's pretty easy. I think success is helping to as many aging adults successfully age. And I think that the more people that benefit or enjoy from our services and better age, whether it's through staying longer in the home, delaying claims, or finding happiness as they age, I think this is our metric of success.
Yeah, it's a sole metric of number of people. I would say that we need others to help us with that. So we've designed this so others will want to join us. But the bottom line, it's others to join us to get to this bigger number. And it's a global thing, not just right now we're focused in the US, but bottom line is this is global.
Amazing. Afik, Roee, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with the two of you. This has been episode 2 of our podcast. If you're interested in hearing more and hearing our previous episode, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.